Today we're going to be doing another try a chapter tag, this time with a twist. I'm going to be reading the first chapters of 11 books and deciding based on that first chapter whether to keep or unhaul the book. So I moved at the beginning of the year, and in that move I went through my books and I kind of culled my collection, and there were some that I just outright unhauled, and then there were some that I couldn't make up my mind about, so I put them in the question mark pile. And that's the pile we're going to be going through today. I did one of these a couple of years ago, which I'll link up in the cards, and in that one, I kept 4 books from that, and of the 4, I believe that I have since read and disliked or unhauled all 4 of those, so this bodes well for today. Hopefully this one will be more successful, so let's go ahead and jump into the books. First up is The Air Affair, which the premise has always intrigued me, but I've literally never felt compelled to pick it up. It sounds very weird, but also very quirky, and our main character is like trying to track down fictional characters that got stolen from their books. Next up is The Invisible Library, which I actually mentally kind of lumped together with The Air Affair, which is why they're both here, because they have fairly similar premises. Instead of characters going missing from books though, this deals with like a library that has books from like multiple different worlds all around the multiple universes, and our main character like tracks those down for this library. I think I read the first chapter of this for a like try a chapter tag where I was trying to figure out if this is what I wanted to read, and I thought that the writing felt a little dated, and ever since then I haven't picked this up almost exclusively because of that, even though the premise sounds cool. So I think today for this I'm actually going to read the first 2 chapters to give it a more extensive chance before I make a decision on this. Next is The Circle, which is one whose premise again has always really intrigued me, but this one actually has really low ratings on Goodreads, and so that has always kind of prevented me from picking it up. I believe there was also a movie made of this with Emma Watson, and it kind of deals with like social media and like how that affects our lives. The Musician's Daughter is another one where, again, intriguing premise, but this one is a really petty mental block that I have. This is a historical fiction novel, which admittedly is not a genre I usually enjoy, but it centers around music and is a mystery novel, and those are both things that I really enjoy. And my mental block for this one is super petty, and it's that I got this at Half Price Books, and I feel like I see it at every Half Price Books I've ever walked into. It just feels like one of those like used bookstore staples, possibly for a good reason. Maybe everyone's trying to get rid of it because no one wants it. Next up is The Rook, which might be the book I've had on my TBR for longer than any other book on my shelves. This book on my TBR predates my booktube channel. I've had this book since 2014 and I have never considered picking it up. I forget that I own it half the time. It's just kind of that book that is still there after all these years, and I just need to either read it or get rid of it at this point. Next is Warcross by Marie Lu, which there are several reasons I haven't picked this up. The main reason why I'm both interested in and also worried about this one is that it's been compared to Ready Player One, and the last time I read a book because it was compared to Ready Player One was The Leveler by Julia Durango, which is one of my least favorite books of all time. It's one of the only books I've given 1 star on Goodreads, and I'm just kind of worried about reading another book that's billed in that same way. Next is 3 Dark Crowns, which is just kind of that book that I don't think I'll like, but for some reason, there's just something that really intrigues me about it. I've kind of fallen out of love with YA fantasy. I read the first 50 pages of this a while back, and I didn't love it. Just everything logically points to this being something I wouldn't enjoy, and yet there's just something about it that sparks interest with me. I don't know why. Maybe it's the competition aspect. I'm not sure. Next, The Dead House. This is another one where I read the first like 20 pages of this one and I didn't totally love the writing, and that is completely why I haven't picked this up yet. It's kind of mixed media. There are like reports and journal entries and stuff like that, and also it just sounds like a really intriguing thriller, and yet those 20 pages that I read like 4 years ago are still seared into my memory as me not liking the writing. London Belongs to Me, yet another one where I read the first chapter. This time it was for a try a chapter tag where I was considering reading this, and I didn't love the main character's voice, and I never picked it up again. Before that though, this was near the top of my TBR, and that first chapter just totally like turned me off from reading it, and now I'm not even sure I still want to read it, but I want to give it a second chance before I get rid of it. The Darkest Corners. This is one that I got because I read Kara Thomas's other book, Little Monsters, and I thought that one was alright, and I just have never picked this up even though the concept sounds cool, so I'm going to finally give this a chance and see if I even still want to read it. And lastly, The First 15 Lives of Harry August. This is one that I should have read for my TBR unhaul 2 years ago, and then I stopped doing the TBR unhaul, so I never read it. Because of that, this is one of the books that's been on my TBR for the longest, and this just isn't something I've been grabbing for lately, and I'm not sure it totally intrigues me anymore, but I was so hyped for this and so excited about it when I bought it that I at least want to give it a chance before I get rid of it. Okay, that is all of them. That probably took way too long, but now I'm going to go ahead and read each first chapter, and I'm going to discuss it afterward, and then at the very end I'll talk about which ones I'm deciding to keep and which ones I'm going to get rid of. Alright, I'm back after reading the first chapter, which was The Musician's Daughter. I always underestimate how much I despise old-fashioned speech in books, and how large of a factor that plays into me not enjoying historical fiction. I think it comes down to me just being such a chill, casual, laid-back person, and me despising everything formal, and old-fashioned speech just feels so formal and awkward, and I hate it. This really felt like I was reading more of a middle grade rather than young adult, or somewhere between middle grade and young adult. I just didn't have the best time reading this first chapter. I actually ended up continuing on to the second chapter just because the first chapter was super short and I felt like I didn't get a ton out of it, but then I stopped mid-chapter because I really wasn't enjoying it. Also, I just noticed this, even though the romance aspect of this is just kind of a blip on the radar on the back of the book, on the front of the book it actually says the mystery of her father's death may lead to true love. So if that is kind of the overarching theme that they're putting on the cover, I think I'm even less interested in this, because I'm here for the music and the mystery, not for the romantic subplot that may not actually be a subplot. So yeah, kind of disappointed with this first chapter because this was one of the premises that most intrigued me, but I did not enjoy this. I'm back after finishing the first chapter of The Darkest Corners, and this was another really short first chapter where I had to continue on into the second chapter because the first chapter was literally a page. I'm honestly still pretty on the fence about this one because I really liked the main character and I liked her voice, but that was the only thing that left really much of an impression with me in this first chapter and a little bit of the second chapter. Also, as intrigued as I am about a mystery that takes place in a small town because of the seclusion and all that stuff, I'm not super thrilled about the small town vibe, if that makes sense. I've lived in a few small towns and really disliked it. And as I started reading this, I realized that it was giving me that same vibe, which, I mean, accurate, but also I'm not sure I want to read about that because it's not something I enjoyed in real life and I don't really want to relive that through a book. Then again, the main character feels the same way as me, so maybe that'll be relatable and I'll enjoy that. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm back after reading the first section of The Circle. This one I don't think has chapter designations, at least that I saw, so I just read the first section until there was a break. Nothing really in this stood out to me as either good or bad. It was just mostly indifference. The writing style seemed fine. I don't have much to say about this one. It was fine. So I just read the first chapter of Three Dark Crowns, and I forget that this happens every time I pick this up, but the thing that always stands out to me when I try this first chapter or I read a section of this is the writing and the fact that it's written in present tense. I think my brain's default setting when it comes to reading a story is past tense, but the fact that this is written in present tense just really stands out to me, and I'm not sure it's in a good way. It almost feels out of place, I guess. And yet still, something about this makes me want to read it and keep it, and I don't know why. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I think I'm leaning toward keeping it, but I'm not sure that the logical side of my brain can make that make sense. I'm back again after finishing the first chapter of Warcross, and that was actually a pleasant surprise. It was definitely a bit of a slower start for me because it's definitely not what I'm in the mood for, so that made it a little bit more difficult to kind of get into it and make up my mind. But once I was into it, I really enjoyed that. The slightly futuristic version of our world that's depicted in here is really intriguing and I want to see more about it, and overall I just enjoyed it. So I just finished the first few chapters of The First 15 Lives of Harry August, and yet again a common theme here is really short chapters. There was one that was literally just a page, like one piece of paper, and then also me still being very conflicted about whether or not to get rid of this. I ended up actually reading 3 chapters just so I could get an actual feel for the story because these chapters were so short, and yet I'm still not sure what to do about this. I kind of expected something a little bit different out of this just because whenever I've heard people talk about it, it feels more like they're discussing a sci-fi, possibly because of the like time travel, like reliving your lives element. But overall, I didn't really get too much from these first few chapters, positive, negative, either way, so I'm not really sure what to do about this. So yet again, another book that is just on the bubble for me. So I just finished reading the first, at least, section of The Dead House. Like I mentioned in the intro clip, I wanted to at least read further than I had before just to get a little bit better of a feel for the story. And upon reading this, I realized that that idea of me not liking the main character's voice or like the writing style came from this section where she's interacting with her friends at high school, which makes sense. Despite my love of dark academia, I also have a long history of disliking like dialogue between characters that's very shallow and vapid, like stereotypical high school, and that's kind of what we got in here, and I'm assuming that's not throughout the entire book, but that scene is what drilled itself into my brain. However, the rest of what I read was really interesting, and I really liked the format of this. I can't remember if I discussed the premise of this when I talked about this in the intro, but this book kind of centers around the fact that the main character is actually 2 people. She is both Carly and Caitlin, and over the summer she's been living in this mental hospital, but she's returning to school, and the doctors believe that she has like dissociative identity disorder, and that I believe Caitlin is just her alter, whereas Carly and Caitlin believe themselves to be like 2 entirely separate humans that have always existed, not just one is an alter that was created from trauma. I don't know a ton about dissociative identity disorder, but that's kind of the discussion here. So that seems to be the central question of the novel, like, are they actually 2 different people, or does she have dissociative identity disorder? And I'm not totally sure how I feel about that. So because of that, I'm not totally sure about this, because otherwise I think I'm leaving with a much better first impression of this story and how intriguing it is than the last time I picked this up, but I'm not totally sure. I might need to look some stuff up about this. Okay, so I'm back after reading the first chapter of The Rook, and that was actually surprisingly intriguing. So basically in this first chapter, our main character wakes up with no memory of who she is, apart from a couple of letters that were stuck in her jacket for her to read that her past self wrote to her now that she has lost her memory. The main thing that's giving me pause about this isn't really even the story or the writing itself. It's more the fact that this type of story, while I am intrigued by it, it hasn't been something I've wanted to read over the past few years. Like, I can't remember the last time I was in the mood for a story like this, let alone when I picked up and read a book like this. And I've read the first chapter of this, and I don't really even necessarily want to continue it right now, even though I enjoyed the first chapter. And also, given that this has been on my TBR longer than pretty much any other book, it just makes me wonder if I will ever be in the mood to read this. Based on this first chapter, I think I'd like this book if I read it, but I'm not in the mood for it, and I don't want to read it at the moment, and I'm not sure when that moment will come, so I'm just not sure. Back again after finishing the first chapter of London Belongs to Me, and that was a doozy. I already went into this thinking that, like, when was the last time I ever picked up a book like this? It's been a long time. This is never something I'm in the mood for, but I did not enjoy that too much. Like I mentioned in the intro, I'm not really digging this main character at all. Firstly, there's just a bunch of condescension to, like, every random woman she ever meets ever, which just... why? And then on top of that, like, everything is a big deal. She screams at the sky. It's just all a little bit too cheesy, too much for me. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I'm probably not gonna be keeping this, but you know, we'll see. Keep the mystery alive a little bit. I'm probably not keeping this. I'm back again for the final time after reading the last 2 first chapters for this video. I read both of these just because these were the last 2, and they're also pretty similar concepts, so I figured I'd just go ahead and talk about them and read them in one fell swoop. I read this one first, and like I said in the intro, since I've already read the first chapter before, I just went ahead and read past the first chapter, and I think that I enjoyed it a little bit more this time around, but it still didn't totally grab me, and I still am not a huge fan of the writing style. However, I forgot that a key detail of this is that she's about to get sent to an alternate version of London, which is something that always really intrigues me in stories, and I forgot that that was part of the premise. Also, as I was reading the premise, it reminded me that there is a lot more supernatural and magical things in the story than I remembered there supposedly being. And once again, although I really enjoy fantasy, lately that hasn't been what I've been in the mood for, and it hasn't been something that I've been grabbing for. So yet again, I'm not sure if I keep this in my collection when I will be in the mood for that and when I will want to pick this up. On the flip side, I actually preferred the Air Affairs writing, although I think that I preferred the first chapter or two of The Invisible Library to the first chapter of The Air Affair. However, I also feel more optimistic about enjoying this series long term than I do about potentially enjoying this series long term, but I feel like I would probably prefer this book over this book, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's weird. These two books are seemingly so similar in premise, but I have the exact opposite thoughts about each of them. Because of this, I feel like I could see myself picking this up a lot sooner than I would pick up The Invisible Library, just because this is more like time travel and surrealism and just weird things happening, which I've been grabbing for more than like actually supernatural and fantastical stories. And something that I'm kind of thinking about with both of these is that both of these main characters are in some form like a kind of a secret agent type character or like a spy. And as much as I have a lot of nostalgia for stuff like that as someone who grew up in the Spy Kids era, I'm not sure that's exactly what I love reading about in books. I think I'd much rather just watch Spy Kids again or watch a spy movie. I'm not sure like a secret agent type scenario or spy scenario is what I want to read in a book. Shockingly, once again, I don't know what I want to do with either of these books. Thankfully, these are the last two, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mull it over for the rest of the day, and then sometime tonight I will film a wrap-up where I talk about which ones I've decided to keep and which ones I've decided to get rid of, and hopefully by that point I can make some sort of decision on the like half of these books that I'm still on the fence about. Okay, it is now the aforementioned tonight, which means it is time for me to make my official decisions, even though there are some I'm still kind of on the fence about. So after reading all the first chapters, I divided the books up into stacks, and we're going to be running through those. The 3 stacks are obviously ones that I would like to keep, ones that I think I'm definitely getting rid of, and then the I still don't know stack, which we're going to go through those like book by book just because I need to finally make a decision on them. This is the stack of books that it was easiest to decide to keep. All 3 of these grabbed me on their premise and their first chapter, so I'm definitely willing to give these another chance on my bookshelf. Whereas London Belongs to Me and The Musician's Daughter are the 2 easiest books for me to unhaul, I read the first chapters of these and didn't want to read any more of either of them, so there's no use keeping them on my shelves because they will literally just stay on my shelves and collect dust. So that leaves us with this stack of 6 books where I still have to make up my mind, so let's run through each of them. Let's start with The First 15 Lives of Harry August, which, after some contemplation, I think I'm going to be unhauling. Even though there was a point in time where I was very intrigued by this book, I never picked it up, and I don't see myself picking it up in the foreseeable future because it's not a type of book I really grab for anymore. So the fact that this first chapter or first 3 chapters didn't really grab me just kind of solidifies the fact that I'm probably not ever going to read this, so I'm going to unhaul it. The Rook is the most painful one for me because my heart says keep it, but my brain says to unhaul it. My heart says that I enjoyed this first chapter and that I would probably really like this book if I actually read it, but my brain says that I haven't been in the mood for this type of story in a while, and even if I was, I probably wouldn't pick that up. And I'm also reminded of the fact that this is a series, and so far the first 2 books are the only ones out, and there has been nothing about the third one, despite the fact that book 2 was published in 2016. I just don't know when I will ever pick this up, and even if I do, it's an incomplete series that doesn't seem like it's going to be finished anytime in the near future, so I just don't logically see a point in keeping this on my shelves, but there's something about me that wants to keep it. Decision. I am going to unhaul this. However, obviously I can't really sell these books anytime in the very, very near future due to circumstances. So if before I take these books to like half-price books, if before that I decide that I want to read this, I can keep it. Otherwise, it gets unhauled. That said, I'm considering this unhauled because I don't think that that will happen, and I think that I will just go ahead and unhaul it with the rest of these books. So, putting it in the unhauled pile. I guess I'm just going to talk about The Invisible Library and The Air Affair in tandem again because that just makes the most sense to my brain. These two books are so frustrating to me because they have similar concepts, but what I disliked about one, I liked about the other. And I just kind of wish I could mash them up into one book that I could keep rather than two books that I have to figure out my opinion on. I feel like they have to have the same fate because I just feel so like equally weird about both of them. Okay, I think I'm going to keep both of these just because I think that my interest is still piqued just enough for each of them to merit them staying on my shelves. I have no idea when I will pick up either one of them. It could be a full year from now or never, but I'm still just interested enough to keep them. I have two left, and these are the two left because they're the most difficult to make a decision on. I don't know what to do. Part of me thinks I should watch the trailer for this movie and figure out if that helps. Okay, so I just watched the trailer for the Circle movie to get a better feel for the vibe of this story. And I thought it was kind of a stupid idea, but after watching the trailer, I think that it's much easier to make the decision I was already leaning toward, which is to unhaul this. I remember I was first intrigued by this because I saw the trailer and I was super compelled by the trailer, and rewatching the trailer now a few years later, it doesn't grab me in the same way that it did the first time, and I think that that plus the kind of meh, alright first chapter makes it easy for me to say that I am going to get rid of this. And lastly, The Darkest Corners. This one I still am not totally sold on one way or the other. Obviously, that's why I left it till the end. Similarly to The Invisible Library and The Air Affair, I think that I am just intrigued enough to keep this despite not being totally sold on it. I liked the main character's voice, and the premise also intrigued me just enough to keep it. And also, this is a mystery or a thriller, and that is most in line with what I tend to pick up most frequently right now. So I think of all of these books, this might be the first one I pick up solely because of that. So in the end, I'm at about as close to half as I can be with 11 books, because it's not like I'm gonna split one in half and keep half of it, because why would anyone do that? So these are the 5 that I have decided to unhaul, and these are the 6 that I'm going to be keeping. It was a difficult decision to come to, but in the end, I think I'm happy with my decision on both ends. And I don't want to commit to like doing some sort of reading challenge where I have to read the ones that I decided to keep, but it's definitely something that I'm considering after doing this and after looking at this pile. So let me know down in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, because I might end up doing that sometime over the next couple months. So that is it for this Try a Chapter Tag Unhaul edition. As always, links to all my social media are down in the description, especially Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I'd love to be friends with all of you on there. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.